December 17, 1944. A frozen field near the Baugnes crossroads outside Malmedy, Belgium. The bitter cold is a physical presence, seeping through the woolen uniforms of the American soldiers huddled near their trucks and jeeps. Their breath plumes in ghostly clouds, the only sign of life in the stillness. These are men of Battery B, 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion, a unit tragically in the wrong place at the exact wrong time. The rumble of their own engines is a familiar comfort, a sound of the rear echelon. But now, a new, deeper, more menacing sound grinds through the pine-scented air, the guttural roar of German diesel engines. Private First Class Homer Ford stamps his feet, trying to force feeling back into his numb toes. He's 19, from Ohio, and this Belgian winter is a cruelty he couldn't have imagined. He glances over at his friend, Sergeant Ken Kramer, who is peering through binoculars, his face a mask of grim concentration. "What do you see, Sarge?" Homer's voice is tight, a mix of cold and a dread he can't name. Kramer doesn't lower the glasses. "Tigers, panthers, a whole damn column of them, and they're flying the SS runes." The words hang in the air, heavier than the overcast sky. The Waffen-SS. They'd heard the stories, of course, whispers of fanatics who fought with a ferocity that defied reason, but those were just stories. Until now, the lead American vehicles, a jeep and a light truck, attempt a futile, almost suicidal dash to escape. A single high-explosive shell from a King Tiger tank turns them into a fireball of molten metal and splintered steel. The concussion wave hits the men like a physical blow. Orders are shouted, confused and desperate. They are artillery observers, equipped with carbines and a handful of machine guns. They are not equipped to fight a battalion of the 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, the spearhead of Joachim Peiper's notorious battle group. The German armor fans out, a steel cordon sealing their fate. An SS officer standing tall in the cupola of a half-track shouts commands in guttural German, his gloved hand gesturing for surrender. Resistance is suicide. One by one, the Americans, their hands raised high, their hearts pounding against their ribs, are herded from the ditches and the tree line into a vast open field. The snow, once pristine, is churned into a muddy brown slush by hundreds of booted feet. You can feel the despair settling over them, a colder chill than the December air. They are prisoners. The rules of war, the Geneva Convention. These are the fragile concepts they cling to now. It is the only shield they have left. But as they are disarmed, a subtle shift occurs. The SS troopers aren't just collecting weapons, they are exuding a palpable contempt. A young SS soldier, his face pale and his eyes hollow, snatches a watch from the American lieutenant's wrist, a quick, brutal motion. Another kicks a canteen from a private's hands. This isn't the professional detachment they'd been told to expect from a captured enemy. This is something darker, more personal. The field becomes a cage, and the guards are predators. The initial relief of surviving the initial engagement is rapidly curdling into a new, more primal fear. They are not just prisoners, they are prey. The field was a bowl of silence, a vacuum where hope went to die. Over 100 American soldiers, their breath collective plumes of anxiety, stood shackled by their own disbelief. The cold was forgotten now, replaced by a searing heat of dread that started in the gut and climbed into the throat. Private Homer Ford watched as two German armored vehicles, a Schwimmwagen and a tank, crawled into position, their engines unnervingly loud in the hush. Their machine guns, until now pointed at the tree line, slowly, deliberately traversed downward. The dark, circular muzzles were now aimed directly into the huddled mass of men. "Ken?" Homer whispered, his voice cracking. Sergeant Cramer didn't answer. His jaw was clenched so tight it looked like it might splinter. He was watching the SS officers, their black uniforms stark against the dirty snow. They weren't barking orders anymore. They were calm, conversing with each other, their gestures casual. One of them, a Hauptsturmführer, lit a cigarette. The mundane act was more terrifying than any shouted command. Then it began. The first shot was unmistakably a pistol shot, a flat, final crack. It didn't come from the perimeter. It came from within the crowd. An American lieutenant, who had protested the theft of his watch moments earlier, crumpled to the ground. A collective, sharp intake of breath swept through the prisoners. The rule book had been torn up. The world tilted on its axis. For a heartbeat, there was only the ringing in their ears. Then the universe exploded. The machine guns on the vehicles opened up, a deafening, ripping sound that tore the air to shreds. The first rows of men were scythed down, their bodies jerking and collapsing under the impact of dozens of rounds. The snow, once white, was instantly sprayed a violent arterial red. Cries of "No!" and "Gott im Himmel" were swallowed by the relentless stutter of the guns. Homer Ford was shoved backwards as the man in front of him, a fellow private from Texas, seemed to disintegrate. Chaos. Pure, unadulterated chaos. The instinct to live overrode the paralysis of shock. Men threw themselves to the ground, scrambling over the bodies of their comrades, slipping in the gore-slicked mud. They pressed themselves into the earth, making themselves small, playing dead amidst a horror that was all too real. The smell was immediate and overwhelming: cordite, blood, and the vile scent of opened intestines. The machine guns ceased. In the relative quiet, the sound was almost worse. Now came the methodical cleanup. Squads of SS troopers, their boots crunching on the frozen ground, walked calmly through the carnage. You could hear their footsteps, their casual conversation. They were hunters strolling through a field of downed prey. They stopped at each body, each twitching form. A coup de grace from a pistol to the back of the head. Crack. Move 2 steps. Crack. Homer lay still, his face pressed into the icy mud beneath a lifeless body. He could feel the warm blood of the soldier on top of him, seeping through his coat. He held his breath, praying the tremors racking his body wouldn't give him away. Through a narrow slit, he saw an SS trooper's boot stop inches from his face. He heard the click of a Luger being cocked. This was it. He thought of Ohio, of his mother's kitchen, the smell of apple pie. The shot rang out, deafeningly loud, but the searing pain never came. The boot moved on. The trooper had shot the man lying next to him. Homer Ford, by a twist of fate and the macabre camouflage of a dead comrade, was still alive, trapped in a tableau of hell. The SS boots finally receded, their gruff voices and the crunch of their footsteps fading back toward the idling German vehicles. An unnatural silence descended upon the field, broken only by the sputter of a dying engine and the low moans of the dying. For the living, those playing dead amidst the carnage, every second was an eternity of terror. A cough, a whimper, the slightest movement could mean a return visit and a bullet to the brain. Private Homer Ford remained frozen, the weight of the dead soldier upon him a ghastly shield. The warmth of the man's blood had soaked through his field jacket and was now turning cold, a slick, icy paste against his skin. He waited, counting the frantic beats of his own heart, listening for any sign of the killers. After what felt like a lifetime, he risked a shallow, shuddering breath. The air he drew in was thick with the coppery stench of blood and the acrid tang of gunpowder, the smell of the abattoir. A whisper, thin and reedy, cut through the silence to his left. They gone? It was the catalyst. All across the field, a macabre resurrection began. Men who had been still as stone began to stir, pushing aside the bodies that had saved them, rising from the gore like phantoms. Their faces were masks of frozen shock, their eyes wide and uncomprehending. Homer shoved against the dead weight on his back, his muscles screaming in protest. He scrambled to his knees, his gaze sweeping over the scene. It was worse than he could have imagined. The snow was gone, replaced by a churned-up mud of red and brown. Bodies lay in heaps, contorted in final, agonized poses. This was not a battlefield, it was an execution ground. "Run!" someone hissed, the word cracking with urgency. "For God's sake, run!" There was no order, no plan. It was pure, adrenalized instinct. Homer stumbled to his feet, his legs numb and unsteady. He joined a small group of survivors, their identities erased by the filth and terror that coated them. They didn't look like soldiers anymore. They looked like hunted animals. They broke for the tree line, their bodies low, expecting at any moment to hear the ripping sound of the machine guns starting up again. The woods offered scant protection, only a different kind of hell. Bare branches clawed at their faces as they ran, stumbling over frozen roots, their breath sobbing in their chests. Every shadow was an SS trooper, every snap of a twig a gunshot. They ran until their lungs burned, then they collapsed, listening, always listening. In the distance they heard more sporadic gunfire. The killing wasn't confined to their field. The SS were methodically hunting them. As dusk began to bleed the light from the sky, the temperature plummeted. The survivors, perhaps 24 of them, huddled in a dense thicket. They had no food, no water, and their soaked uniforms were freezing to their skin. Shock began to wear off, replaced by a gnawing, bone-deep cold and a trembling exhaustion. A man nearby, a corporal from Kansas, began to weep silently, his shoulders shaking. No one comforted him. There were no words. They had seen the face of the enemy, and it was not the face of a soldier who fought for his country. It was the face of an ideologue who believed in their annihilation. The war, for these men, had just become profoundly, terrifyingly personal. Hours later, a miracle, the cautious challenge of an American voice from the perimeter of their thicket. "Halt! Who goes there?" The response from the survivors was a broken, collective croak. "Friend, we're Americans. For the love of Christ, we're from the 285th. They were brought into the lines of an infantry company, their story spilling out in fractured, hysterical bursts. The GIs who listened stared in horrified disbelief. These filthy, shivering, hollow-eyed men spoke of a massacre, of machine guns fired into a crowd of unarmed prisoners, of SS men walking among the wounded, executing them. The news traveled up the chain of command like an electric shock. It was inconceivable. It was barbaric. And as more survivors stumbled into Allied lines over the next 24 hours, each with the same horrific account, the truth became undeniable. The Battle of the Bulge had just revealed its darkest, most savage heart. The command post was a chaotic symphony of typewriters, crackling radios, and the low, urgent hum of staff officers. Into this organized tumult, the survivors of Balnez Crossroads were brought like ghosts from another world. They were given blankets, hot coffee that most could not stomach, and were guided to any available space storerooms, corners, even the floor. Their arrival had shattered the clinical, map-based reality of the war room. The cold statistics of a unit overrun now had faces, voices, and a story that defied all military convention. An intelligence officer, Captain John Regan, sat with Homer Ford, his notepad open but largely ignored. He listened, his face a careful, professional mask, as the young private from Ohio spoke in a flat, hollow monotone. Homer's hands would not stop trembling, making the steam from his mug of coffee dance and swirl. He described the casual theft of the watch, the calm demeanor of the SS officer with the cigarette, the first pistol shot. When he reached the machine guns, his voice faltered. "They just kept shooting," he whispered, staring at a crack in the floorboards. "And then they walked through and they... He couldn't finish. He didn't have to. The horror was etched into the 1,000-yard stare he now possessed. All through the night and into the next day, similar debriefings took place. The accounts were chillingly consistent. The placement of the vehicles, the type of weapons, the cold-blooded methodology of the executions. The number of survivors grew. 84 men in total had escaped the killing field. Their collective testimony coalesced into an irrefutable truth. This was not a battlefield incident. This was a war crime of a calculated and systematic nature. Within days, an official U.S. Army report was filed documenting the Malmedy Massacre. The news spread through the ranks not via official bulletins, but through the grim, soldier-to-soldier grapevine. The effect was electric and transformative. For the American GI, the SS, the Schutzstaffel, was no longer just another elite enemy unit. They were die Engel des Todes, the angels of death. The rules had changed. The unspoken gentleman's agreement about surrender, about the treatment of prisoners, had been incinerated in that Belgian field. A new, hard-edged pragmatism infected the American lines. Men who had once spoken of Krauts now spoke of SS with a specific, venomous hatred. Orders were quietly adapted. The sentiment, rarely spoken aloud but widely understood, was simple: take no SS prisoners. It was a brutal, visceral reaction to a brutal, visceral act. The Battle of the Bulge was no longer just a battle for territory. It was a moral crusade against an ideology of utter ruthlessness. The fanaticism they faced meant that surrender was not an option for either side. It was a fight to the death. Weeks later, when the snows finally receded and the American counteroffensive reclaimed the ground, a war crimes investigation team arrived at the crossroads. The scene they documented was harrowing. The bodies, frozen in time, were exhumed from the shallow snow where they had fallen. The evidence was all there: bullet wounds in the back of the head, hands still raised in permanent surrender, personal effects looted. The field itself was a silent accuser. For Homer Ford and the other survivors, the war did not end with the German surrender in May 1945. They carried the frozen field back with them to Ohio, to Kansas, to Pennsylvania. They carried the smell of blood and cordite, the sound of the boots, the weight of the dead upon their backs. The Malmedy Massacre became a benchmark for Nazi brutality, a stark lesson in the nature of the fanaticism the world had faced. It was a tragedy born in the cold heart of the Ardennes winter, a moment when American GIs learned in the most horrific way imaginable that they were facing an enemy for whom the rules of war and of humanity did not exist. Thank you for watching. Hope to see you next video. To see.